Hi, my name is Leah Welch. I am Middlebury class of 2011. I was a history of art and architecture major, and I'm currently a data visualization designer at Bottom Line Technologies and an MFA student at Northeastern University in data visualization.
That's awesome. So yeah, looking at your website and also your LinkedIn profile, it's clear that you've been involved in a lot of cool design work. And I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the design process involved in your work.
Sure. So at work now, which is where I do the majority of my design work, my team is brought in basically whenever a line of business needs to add some data visualization to one of their products. And depending on our existing knowledge of the product and whether we've worked with that team before, my manager and I will complete some amount of discovery. And based on our initial findings, we'll create a set of conceptual models that kind of bring together the information architecture and the data as far as we understand it. These are a lot of interviews and looking at the existing user interface. And from all of these models, we'll sketch our hypothesis of how we think the data will behave. That all happens before we see any real or representative data. And sometimes getting our hands on that data can take a long time. Eventually, we get the opportunity to test our hypothesis against some coded sketches of the real data. And then we'll have to update our hypothesis to accommodate for things like noise in the data or a really weird range or some outlier. And we go through this iterative process of sketching and updating a few times. And during this entire period, we're keeping everything really like low fidelity. So rough sketches in Adobe Illustrator for the ideation and rough sketches in D3 and JavaScript for the kind of coded experimentations with the data. And after all of that, that might take a few months, we'll land on a satisfactory set of forms for the data. And that will be when we start to introduce things like style or interaction.
That's
and then
awesome.
we usually hand it off. Like that's when we kind of step away.
Oh, I see. So who do you hand it off to? And where does your job kind of end, I guess?
Sure. We'll hand it off to UX designers and they'll create a high fidelity prototype, something very interactive, using Sketch and InVision or Figma. Then they hand that prototype to the developers to build it into the application.
That's fascinating.
And
well,
we're
it
there
sounds
to
like it's
advise on that.
It sounds like it's a very multifaceted process that takes a lot of iteration over months. So I guess what do you find to be like the most challenging and or interesting part of this whole process?
I love all of it, but I really love the coding. So if I get to build an interactive prototype myself and it deals with some kind of complex coding problem, then I'm happy. I could do that for hours and hours and get really lost in it. On the other hand, the most like kind of challenging thing I've had to do recently is address the way that we design and the processes that we're using at Bottom Line. So I'm building out a visualization library for our design system. And that involves taking this really high level holistic view at how like lots of different designers work with their tools and tackle design problems. And it's taking me down some interesting rabbit holes of how people think. And I think that that's something that like that transition from tactical, like I'm coding this work to I'm going to think about how this entire system behaves. That's an interesting kind of growth challenge, but I'm really enjoying it. And also I'm like in a design theory class right now, and that's teeing up really well with thinking about these larger problems. So everything's like really conceptual in my brain right now.
How does that kind of inform the work you're currently doing?
Sure. That degree is everything for me. I wouldn't have my career without it. On a really practical level, I came into data viz not knowing how to code. I was a graphic designer. and I got my entire technical foundation from classes that I took at Northeastern. And that enabled me to get my job at Bottomline because I had to be able to code in D3 in order to do my work. But now that I'm a little further along in my studies and I'm also simultaneously working in the field, I feel like these two worlds actually inform each other really well. So my studies provide this critical framework for everything that I'm doing at Bottomline. And then I'll see like instances of the phenomena that I'm reading about play out at work. And so I can really kind of like see the connections. It's very fun.
So how does design and data visualization influence your decision-making and behaviors?
Oh man. I think that data visualization and design in general is a really wonderful way to learn about the world and to understand things. I think one of the reasons why I got into data viz after taking a lot of time away from design is because I felt really bored and I wanted to start learning about stuff rapidly. And when you're designing with data, you have to understand the context of that data. So suddenly you're thrown into this world and you're having to think about all of the different pieces and levers that you can pull on to make something come together. And I think from like the person who's not designing it standpoint, so from a consumer of data visualization, I made a note about like the COVID example as like the kind of key example of how data visualization impacts people's behavior. So at the height of COVID, everyone in the morning would wake up and open some kind of browser and start looking at the chart and see what are the, cases in my county, in my state, in my country, and use that information and like the trend of that information to make decisions about what is safe. And, that's a really powerful thing. A good data visualization will enable this moment of discovery for its audience and also expose patterns and relationships in the raw data that become a form of data themselves. And that's a generation of new knowledge.
How has this role as technologies changed and tastes have changed, like evolved over time, the nature of the work, the skills, the tools?
Okay, so data viz is very new. And when I started at my company, there was like a kind of a general lack of understanding about what data visualization like could be, what it should be. There wasn't a lot of data literacy going around. And so people thought about data viz in the context of software and product design as charts inside of widgets on a dashboard. And they're all isolated and they don't really interact with each other. And maybe you can hover over one of them and see a tooltip, but that's about it. And a lot of the work that like my team started doing when because we started together, was to change the way that people thought about data, show them what data viz can be, and create this more holistic environment for people to interact with their data. I had to code a lot of really complex prototypes as proof of concept to show people like this is how the data can behave and interact. And now we have some momentum. We've been doing this for a little over a year. And so we can focus more on creating conditions in which that strategy can thrive. And it's a lot of facilitation rather than just designing stuff from scratch. I get to create these holistic resources for other designers to help them craft better visualizations. And then I'm just kind of in the background supporting their work.
What do you think are the biggest opportunities moving forward or new avenues that are opening up?
It's funny because like my boss likes to say that all application design is information design. We're just not thinking about it that way yet, because everything in the application is some form of data. And so I don't like to think about data viz as being isolated from other forms of design. Also because I come from this background of graphic design and UX, so it all really does work together. And I feel like design in general is at a really interesting point of transition where we're starting to think about everything that we as designers do as a kind of stewardship, as opposed to an older model which saw design as kind of problem solving. And what we're stewarding is this like living dynamic system. So we don't ship a product, like dust our hands off and say like, I'm never going to think about this thing again. Our materials aren't hard. They're not even really tangible. They're information. And acknowledging the cybernetic nature of design can be really hard for people. And that's where like the challenge is you get this resistance from an older generation of designers. And it's exciting because it affects absolutely everything, not just applications or software. So if you think about like the structure of an organization, for example, and instead of thinking about this like top-down tree structure, but it's like a network that enables sharing and creation of knowledge, everyone in that organization, regardless of their title or their salary, should be empowered to be thinking of their role as like a research role. That comes from thinking about things as systems, and that's disruptive.
So you were a history of art and architecture major, class of 2011.
Yep.
And what got you interested in Middlebury or afterwards in data visualization?
Yeah, I didn't know about data visualization while I was at Middlebury. That was like the farthest thing from my mind. I also was very intimidated by coding. I didn't think that coding was meant for someone like me, someone who likes art and drawing and fashion and these kinds of things. And that actually is how I found design, is through fashion. Okay, I loved it. Someone recommended I take a costume design class as an elective, and the experience of being in the studio and making things like fired me up. And so I decided to keep going with that, and eventually kind of realized that fashion wasn't for me, and I switched to graphic design. And years later, like 8 years later or something, I didn't want to do graphic design as marketing and branding anymore. I didn't really want to make logos or help people sell things. Like none of that really felt authentic to, I don't know, who I am. And so I was looking for another application for the skills, because I loved like the actual work of sitting and designing things. And that was when, I don't know, somehow I sort of like stumbled and found, like I fell on data viz as an application of graphic design, like information design, which is kind of like the maybe less techie side of data viz, is an application of graphic design for storytelling and offering insight and kind of revealing information. And it was really appealing. And so what I ended up doing was taking a 2-week class at the Rhode Island School of Design in information design and data visualization. And it's like a class that anybody can take who's, I think, had at least 1 year of college. I took it when I was 30. So I was much older than everybody else, and I was also pregnant. So it's a very funny time to be doing this. But there were students. Basically, I'm saying this like Middlebury students could go and do this in the summer, and you go and live there. And I, took this amazing class with this unbelievably, like, I don't know, one of like the giants of graphic design education, Douglas Scott, who teaches at Yale and at RISD and at Northeastern. And he's the one who told me about the Northeastern graduate program and kind of like, lit that fire for me. But like it's just another way of thinking about designing that people don't talk about enough, because graphic design is so often lumped in with marketing and branding.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good distinction, because I think a lot of people definitely think of the marketing side when there's so much more to it. Also, coming from sort of the art and history of art and architecture at Middlebury, where there's a lot of studio focus, would you say that that translates at all to what you're doing now, or is it much more individual?
Ooh. Yeah, I think learning how to like take critique and use critique for the betterment of like your work and your team's work, that's something that started at Middlebury for me in my costume design classes, where we'd have to pin up our little drawings and everybody would tear into everyone else's work. In a constructive way, of course. But yeah, you have to be able to kind of separate yourself personally from the work that you've done, and think more about, okay, what is going to make the project, what is going to serve the project, what's going to make the project better, like not just what is like my ego and what is all about me. But I think the main thing that I got out of Middlebury from the history of art and architecture side, because I was not taking a lot of art classes, like I was mostly reading and writing. You can see like my book collection behind me. Most of these are from Middlebury, from like my thesis and stuff like that. And it was like how to spend a lot of time thinking about a problem, how to think really critically and communicate your thoughts eloquently about that problem, how to research in like this really ferocious way that you kind of only get to do in a liberal arts setting. And then, I don't know, because I knew about art history, I could call on that history, that really important history, in my design work. and I could, reference these things. And my only wish is that there was more like design history in the history of art and architecture department. I don't know if that's changed in the, 10 plus years since I've been at Mid, but yeah, it would have been nice to get some more in-depth background on the things that I was really interested in, which were not so much fine art, but like material culture, graphic design, posters, things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good connection. And I think probably especially important in a field that's all about communication. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I mean, a lot of what we do is we have to like stand up and defend our work. My team will make something, it'll be something that people are not comfortable with or they haven't seen before. And we have to show it to stakeholders and convince them that this is the right way to go about it. And so that takes like knowing how to put together a presentation, like being comfortable talking in front of people who are paid a lot more than you are and defending your work and answering questions. I don't know, all that foundation is built at Middlebury if you seek it out.
So for all the students that are interested in these sort of design, data visualization jobs, what would you say is the most important tip or tips to getting your foot in the door?
Okay. Learn to code as soon as you can. There are a couple of reasons for this. If you can't manipulate the data quickly and efficiently and do complex manipulations on your own, there's a real limit to the creative side of what you can make if you want the thing that you make to be accurate. So yeah, you can have all these wonderful ideas and you can draw everything out in Illustrator or even by hand, but it would take a really long time. So if you want to build up a portfolio and create things that people can interact with, you need to learn JavaScript and D3.js, which is a JavaScript library for data visualization. Those are the two most important languages. There are other ways that you can do the data side of it, like Excel or R, but at the end of the day, the cutting edge of what is really cool is made with D3.
Awesome. And what are the extents of what D3 can do, and when do you need to start using other software to actual visualize the data?
Right, so D3 does all of the visualization work, but if you're making something extremely custom and maybe animated, it might be worthwhile to check out a couple of other coding languages. For the kind of object-oriented programming side of things, so people who are familiar with Java, there's sort of this Java for designers who don't like coding called processing, and it is really fun. It is super easy to use, and it works super well for data visualization. But you have to run it as like a Java app on your computer. So there's a limit to what you can do with that. If you want to make web-based animations that are really custom and animated, P5.js is basically processing plus JavaScript. And that is also a really great language to learn. So I think those plus D3 will get you everywhere you need to go when you're doing the animated and interactive side of things. For pure design, I don't think anything really beats Adobe Illustrator. It is simply the best. Other kind of prototyping software, if you want to do something kind of in between coding and making a static kind of Illustrator drawing, would be any of those user experience prototyping softwares. That could be Adobe XD, Axure RP, UXPin, Sketch, InVision, Figma. There are like a million out there. Just pick one and get really good at it and make sure that it can address all of the different use cases that you care about. The other thing, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got about making a portfolio is make the kind of work that you want to make in the job. So don't worry about what you think looks good or what anyone else around you is doing. If you're not interested in data journalism, don't make data stories. On the flip side, if you're not interested in software, don't make an interface. Only make the things that you want to keep making, because people are going to look at what you're doing and only like take that at face value. They're not going to make any kind of assumptions about what else you can do if you don't show them.
What kinds of jobs should you be looking for? Is it always just posted as data visualization, or are there other terms or searches that you should be looking for that might get you one of these sorts of jobs?
Yeah, it is almost never posted as data visualization. That is kind of the rub. It's such a new field that it's hard sometimes. Like my title is data visualization, but I'm the first data viz designer at the company. And that's pretty common for there to be either like 0 or 1 person doing this job right now. You can look for things like product designer, visual designer, user experience, but then you're usually going to be doing like something else in addition to data viz. On the other side, you could be looking at like data analyst or data scientist, and maybe they'd be bringing you in to do some visualization work. Also front end developer, sometimes they end up doing some data engineering. I would say like even more important than what the title is, or like what are the things that you can do with this skill set. So there are sort of like 4 main areas where you can look. You can do academic work, and that's always needed because there really aren't enough programs out there teaching data visualization right now to young people. Then there's the whole data journalism side. Really exciting, wonderful work. New York Times, Boston Globe, they're doing awesome data viz work. Then there's sort of the creative marketing art side of things. So companies will, hire a firm to do some data viz work as part of a report that they're putting out or as part of a marketing campaign that they're putting out. And those tend to be really creative jobs. You can make a lot of really interesting work. And then the fourth, which is what I do, is kind of working in tech. So software, I work with financial data, and it's not like, as flashy or exciting maybe as the other ones, but it is like a steady and lucrative career path, and there's a lot of room for growth. And that one is like, yeah, you're working in apps, you're building apps and products.
Awesome. And so when you've found a job and you're being ready to interview, are there any tips on things that you definitely should mention in your interview? Yeah, especially coming from a liberal arts background, maybe at this point, if you're a computer science major and that you're coming from Middlebury.
Yeah, so if you're doing any kind of design interviewing, you're going to have to show your work and talk about it. So what I would prepare is an explanation of how you made that work and the context in which that work lives. So thinking a little bit about your audience, being able to describe the brief and your process, how you got there, even talking about the things that you tried that didn't work, talk about the data. And if you're doing something creative or unusual, explain, I don't know, how to read the visualization in a way that also loops in your thought process a little bit so that it doesn't feel arbitrary. I think what people hate to see is like a really creative visualization that's either hard to read or doesn't really make any sense when you break it down. So yeah, just like talk about how you got there. That is almost more important than how beautiful or polished your final work is.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's kind of like the technical understanding of how it operates comes before the like design beauty, would you say? Or
even more than that is like the kind of high level conceptual thinking, like show me a model of what this data is, like show me a model of the interaction patterns, or like how you broke down the data, what is the hierarchy of it. A lot of what data viz comes down to is like understanding structures and being able to take that abstraction and then translate into something that people can understand. So how you got there, it might not be like very beautiful to show it, but it is the core of doing good data viz. Yeah, definitely. Like I love to use the example of the health data app on the iPhone. I don't know if you're an iPhone user, but
I have an Android. But...
Okay. So all the iPhone users out there, like I check this all the time because I'm like, oh, how much have I walked today? And how many miles have I gone? How many flights of stairs have I gone up? And it's all done in visualizations, and they're really simple, but they're really elegant, and they tell you exactly what you need to know. And someone like me had to sit and like think about the best way to do that and what things to show and how to show an average and whether you've crossed over that threshold or not. Like all of those little things, that's what makes up a good data experience. And it's everywhere once you start looking for it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's why what you said earlier was really powerful, that the more everything we do is intertwined with technology, the more we need to actually visualize and understand what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that data visualization and data collection can sometimes get a bad rap. It's like, oh, these tech companies are coming and they're taking all our data and they're going to sell it to people or something. But there's the other side of it, which is that data that my devices are collecting about me help me understand myself better and help me maybe improve my behaviors to live like a healthier or happier life. Also helps me understand the world better. So there are like a lot of different applications for it. And, you know, maps are also data visualization. So we use them all the time. They're really beautiful and they're insanely helpful. So it is just a part of how we function in the modern world.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, so I guess going into like the technology that you have to use, do you like talking about maps, do you have to use like ArcGIS or anything like that? Or like are there times when you have to learn a specific technology for like one project?
Um, there are times when you have to learn a technology for a project. I haven't had to learn ArcGIS, but I have had to work with Mapbox, which is another one of those mapping kind of, you know, library. You plug it into D3 and then you can like lay stuff on top of it. I think that when you're working in tech and you want to be able to grow, you have to always be open to learning new tools, learning new languages and technologies, and just trying to kind of push yourself constantly to get better at your craft, because it really is a craft. Like there's a side of it where you're like, I'm going to be a technical boss and I'm going to be really good at what I do so that I can handle any problem. And then there's I'm going to be a really strong design thinker and I'm going to be able to look at this from a lot of different angles and ask the right kinds of questions and get everybody thinking about this problem the right way. And I think to be successful, you need to do both things.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and meet with us and inspire current Middlebury students. So it is very much appreciated. And I definitely suggest that everyone check out your website and check you out on LinkedIn because the things you've done are really spectacular.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, like, please connect with me, everyone in the Middlebury community. I love to talk shop and I love to, you know, give advice to young designers. So reach out, I'd be happy to talk.